to the U.S. now, where it's the last weekend before Tuesday's presidential election. The two candidates have been crisscrossing the country and focusing on swing states that will determine the next president. In Atlanta, Democratic candidate Kamala Harris repeated her pledge to be a president for all Americans. Later, she's due to attend a rally in Charlotte, North Carolina. Former President Donald Trump is also campaigning in North Carolina, which is marking its last day of early voting. Trump has promised to crack down on migration and to cut taxes. We can now speak to DW Correspondent Janelle Dumalaon, who joins us from the U.S. Capitol of Washington. Janelle, good to see you. So, just 3 days until the U.S. election, and as we've mentioned, it seems to be 7 battleground states that are pretty much going to decide who wins. What have you been hearing from these swing states?
Yes, Mariana, definitely it is the final stretch. And as you pointed out, both candidates today are in North Carolina. Harris was in Georgia earlier. Tomorrow they will be in the battleground state of Michigan. And on Monday, both candidates will be campaigning in Pennsylvania. That all-important Pennsylvania, many are saying it is the make or break state in this election. Of course, it all represents a part of this final effort to break the deadlock that these candidates are in. In all the 7 swing states, neither of them have a definitive lead. There was a poll earlier from 538 showing that Harris had a slight lead over Trump in the states of Wisconsin and Michigan, and Trump had the lead everywhere else. But you know, these leads are so small, they all fall within the margin of error 3 days before the election, and it is still very much on a knife's edge.
All right. Well, Janelle, also taking place in Washington today is the Women's March. We can see that you're standing pretty close to where the action are. What's the focus of this year's protest? We can hear a lot of spirited speeches already underway right now. What are you hearing from the demonstration?
Yeah, as you've already pointed out, it's quite lively. So 5,000 people are expected to march from here to the White House just in front of me. So that's a very short walk. And as crowd sizes go, that's not actually quite that significant. If we recall back to 2017, when Trump was just elected, over 420,000 people participated in the Women's March. Many would say that was a reaction to Trump getting elected. But to those who are here, they're here because it is very important for them to be able to have their voices heard on the defense of reproductive rights. It is very important to them to see the restoration of the federal protection to the right of an abortion, that right that was overturned when Roe versus Wade was overturned. Now, just because of who the candidates are and who they represent, gender is going to play a very big role in this election, and whoever becomes president will really determine the shape of what it means to be a woman in this country for the years to come. And many of the demonstrators here today are very aware of that fact.
That was DW correspondent Janelle Dumalaon reporting for us from the Women's March in Washington, D.C., just a couple of days before that presidential election in the country. Janelle, thank you for your reporting. We appreciate it. We can now speak to Michele Swers. She's a professor of American government at Georgetown University in Falls Church, Virginia, and she's also written 2 books on women and representation in Congress. Professor Swers, welcome to DW. Just how big of an issue is reproductive rights when it comes to driving voter turnout in this election?
Well, thank you so much for having me. In terms of driving the turnout for the election, there's a couple of ways to think about it. Certainly, it's one of the stronger issues for Kamala Harris, and she emphasizes it a lot as part of her freedom agenda. There are also several states, 10 of them, that have ballot initiatives, which means that the voters can vote to change their state laws, where they're trying to either put abortion rights into their state's constitution or they're trying to overturn previous bans. And some of those are in some of what we call the key battleground states that people think will decide the election, those being Arizona and Nevada, particularly.
Now, we've heard in recent days from prominent Republican Nikki Haley that Donald Trump's messaging is turning women off. We heard Trump just in the past week say at a rally that he would protect women whether they like it or not. Do we know where he stands on a woman's right to choose?
So President Trump has been kind of cagey about it because he knows that his position right now is not that popular. So he's talked about the fact that he would support IVF and making that something that was accessible to women. He leans into the idea that the states should decide. So he tries to get away from that issue and talk more about this protection idea. Gen Z women, particularly, and college-educated women, are women that are most interested in the abortion rights question and find it most motivating for their vote. And so they would tend to be turned off by that kind of rhetoric. But there are a significant number of pro-life women that perhaps that appeals to.
Well, meanwhile, Kamala Harris said that her first priority as president would be to, as she put it, stop this pain coming out of abortion bans. But is she in a position to do that?
So it would be difficult for her to make changes in law because that has to go through our Congress. And it's not likely that either party is going to have a sufficient margin in Congress to be able to pass a new law. But as president, you can do a lot of things through executive action. So I can imagine that she would try to make it easier to access, for example, the abortion pill, which if President Trump becomes president again, I imagine that he would try to restrict access to it. So when they talk about a national ban or restoring Roe versus Wade, those things are hard to do through law, but there's a lot that they can do through executive action.
Well, I do want to ask you about the overturning of the landmark Roe versus Wade decision that was just 2 years ago. And we know, of course, that that ruling had protected the right to an abortion for nearly 50 years. Is there any path to restoring the protections of Roe versus Wade?
So the path would have to be through the legislature. Right now, since everything is returned to the states, the other path is to have states that have ballot initiatives, and not all states allow that, but have those states pass protections. And you have seen that happen. In 2022, there were a number of states that passed protections, and there are a number of states that have it on their ballot now. Some of those states already allow abortion rights, and they're just trying to enshrine it in their constitution. But some of those states, you would be overturning a ban. So in Florida, they have a 6-week ban, and you would be changing that to allow abortion until viability, which is around 24 weeks. Missouri similarly has a ban. And so if they pass their abortion initiative, it would be overturning that ban. But in terms of a national law, you'd have to do that through Congress. And at least the way that Congress has been recently, where very close margins, it's pretty unlikely, especially because in the Senate we have something called the filibuster that requires a supermajority, that either party is going to have that supermajority to pass a national law that would enshrine the protections of Roe versus Wade.
That was Michele Swers, professor of American government at Georgetown University. Thank you so much for all of your insights.
Thanks for having me.